So I was recently watching the news, and there was an item on about a car wreck that took place, I think it was 2021, where a police officer was driving back to the station and hit another car, killing the person in the car. And it was tried in federal court, and the news reporters kept saying, "We don't know why this is going to the jury. Usually these are knocked out by governmental immunity." Now, I've dealt with governmental immunity a couple of times when somebody sues the chief appraiser uh, individually and as part of his job. It's come up, but I was pretty certain that when a vehicle was involved, that the immunity was waived. But the reporter obviously had not read the statute very closely. So anyway, I became interested in governmental immunity when they asked me what I wanted to talk about. So I thought, well, this is a good opportunity. And when I do these presentations, especially on something I don't know, I actually get a little chance to learn a little bit about the topic. And this was no different. Oops. Sorry. Now, does anybody know what these cases have in common? No guesses? Close. These are all cases against governmental entities and governmental employees. The first one is the George Floyd, the officer that was involved in the George Floyd case. The second one is the one I just referred to, which was the car wreck in 2021. And the last one just completed, and that was one of the officers at the Robb Elementary shootings. And so I thought, why did these go? Why did these go all the way to a verdict? Each one of these did. So I thought that's what we would talk a little bit about today. Governmental immunity comes to us from Britain. It was originally called sovereign immunity. And it came up under the theory of the king can do no wrong. We took it and brought it over here. And one of the interesting things about the British setup was the king was also the head of the judiciary. If you had a case and it was important enough, eventually the king could see the case. But he was seldom sued unless he consented. And that's a great thing. You didn't really want to sue the king in Britain because he had, not only was he head of the judiciary and he would make a final determination as to your complaints, he also had a number of other powers. He was head of the executive branch to the extent they had a branch, but his powers extended well beyond that. King had the power to raise armies. Downside to that was he was the head of the army, and he was expected to lead the armies into battle. 6 British kings died as a result of this, the last one being in 1485, Richard III. 2 of them actually died on the battleground. 2 of them died as a result of injuries received on the battleground. 1 died during a siege, and 1 died before they actually became Britain, and he was a Scottish king. The king also had the ability to summon, suspend, and dismiss Parliament. Does anybody get the reference? Nobody was born and grew up in the 70s. Parliament was the name of a group. Yeah, there we go. Parliament was the name of a group during the 70s. When I typed in Parliament, this came up, and I thought this was way better than a picture of the British Parliament. If you haven't heard the group, you might want to go listen to them. But Parliament, he had to call Parliament because Parliament had the ability to tax. And even in Britain, with all the powers the monarch had, they did not have the power to tax. As I said earlier, the king was the head of the judiciary. And not only did he hear cases that he thought was important enough to consider, the king, on his own volition, could bring charges of treason. And then he would sit in judgment of that. Not sure how many history buffs we have here. I'm a history buff. So Henry VIII's second wife, Anne Boleyn, there were rumors and rumors of adultery. She did not produce a male heir. So she was on the outs with the king. But he couldn't bring charges of adultery. But he could bring charges of high treason. And that's what she was charged with. And she was found guilty. And part of the reasoning is that because she had not protected the royal lineage, she had committed high treason through these adulterous affairs. The king, though, in what was described, I went on a tour of this when I was over there, and it was described as an act of kindness. The king allowed her to be beheaded behind the tower walls rather than being hung in public. So not such a bad guy after all, I guess. They have changed the law slightly. In 1947, they made it possible to now sue the crown. However, the monarch has personal immunity. You will get nothing out of the monarch. You may be able to sue the crown now, make complaints about it, but the monarch maintains the personal immunity. So how does this work? How does sovereign and governmental immunity work? Are they the same thing? Are they different? Honestly, before I started getting ready for this, I just used them interchangeably. I thought they were pretty much the same thing. Technically, they're not. Sovereign immunity applies to the state, and governmental immunity applies to employees or subdivisions of the state. I represent the Harris Central Appraisal District. They are a political subdivision of the state, so I've got to go back and check all my forms to make sure I'm not talking about sovereign immunity, and rather I'm talking about governmental immunity. And then, let's say you've got it, how's it going to work? Again, we took the British idea, you cannot sue the state absent consent. Consent is typically either given in the Constitution or through legislation. And the big one that we have here, I think that will be of most interest to half the audience anyway. There are two types. One is a bar from suit, and the other typically is a bar from liability. The bar from liability has been held to refer to caps, limitations on damages, that sort of thing. Interestingly, and again, I'm going to have to check my forms because I did learn something. When I sign an answer for the district, we don't put governmental immunity in the answer typically, unless I know there's a jurisdictional issue. If they sue in county court, then I know there's a jurisdictional issue, and governmental immunity will be in there. If they sue one of the individuals individually, one of our officers individually, and as part of their job, then it'll be in there. But the court has held that limitations on damages need to be pled, affirmatively pled. So I need to check my answer and make sure I know it's not in there now. And since the tax code gives us a cap on attorney's fees, an argument could be made that we should probably be putting that in our answer. We have a meeting once a month with the attorneys. I'm going to bring that up then and show them the case I found. And if anybody wants the case, come see me afterwards. So, in order to sue the state, they do have to waive immunity. The big place that the state waives it in Texas is under the Texas Tort Claims Act, which is in the Civil Practice and Remedies Code. And in that, they have waived immunity. The state has waived immunity under certain circumstances, one of which is the motor vehicle. So I was right. The reporter didn't read the statute, which made me feel pretty good about myself as I was getting dressed for work one day. But it was short-lived because even though it's in there and there are caps, Is anybody here involved in the Payne versus City of Houston litigation? Oh, okay. I was hoping somebody would know something about that. And even though there are caps, this is the big waiver. This is the one you would most likely see. There's one other one that affects me, and that's the property tax code. Property tax code in and of itself is one huge waiver of allowing suit for a political subdivision. It sets out how you have to do it. It sets out when you have to do it, sets forth all sorts of limitations, but it is a waiver of immunity. There is one time when the state can be sued or its employees can be sued when there is no waiver, and that's when the acts are ultra vires. Simply put, an ultra vires act is an act which goes beyond or has no legal authority. If you are suggesting that someone committed a crime, there is no immunity because that goes beyond legal authority. So, it's kind of touchy. So, with that in mind, let's go back and look. Those are the basics of the immunity. Let's go back and look at our three cases. So I don't know how many of you folks remember the first case, Chavin versus, it's actually, how's this? Minnesota versus Chavin. And there was a video at the time of the incident where the officer had his knee on the neck of George Floyd, who was handcuffed and on the ground. And they brought charges against Officer Chavin. And it went to trial. They brought criminal charges against him. It went to trial, and he was convicted on 3 counts, and I'll talk about those in a minute. Does anybody have a guess as to why it went to trial? Okay. First of all, it was a criminal case. Immunity won't apply. They argued, they brought him up on charges of violating the law, both federally and state law. And so he was tried and found guilty of second-degree unintentional murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter, and was sentenced to 22 and a half years. He pled guilty on the federal crimes, which were the same thing, and they ran concurrently. So there was nothing added for the federal civil rights violations. Now, there was also the family members brought suit against the city and the officers, civil suit. Did governmental immunity apply there? No. They said because his actions were so egregious and so far beyond the pale that the violation of law showed that it was an ultra vires act. That argument was never tested because the case was settled out of court for $27 million. City of Minneapolis paid $27 million in that case. Whoops, sorry. City of Houston versus Payne. This is the one I was talking about earlier. I believe it occurred in Pasadena. Is anybody familiar with this case? Don't have to be involved in it. Is anybody see it on the news? Am I the only one who watches the news? Okay. A police officer was driving back to the station. Lights were not on. He was driving 70 miles an hour in a 35-mile-an-hour zone. He was going back to the station to fill out paperwork. The station had a deadline by which you had to fill out reports. He was on his way back to the station. Driving 70 without his lights on, non-emergency situation. He struck and killed Mr. Payne, who was trying to cross the street. The evidence was that if the officer had not been driving 70 miles an hour, Mr. Payne would have crossed the street and there would have been no accident. And Mr. Payne was killed as a result of that. Plaintiffs filed suit in federal court, again alleging civil rights violations and claims under the Texas Tort Claims Act. It went to jury, And the jury recently came back with a $13 million verdict against the city. Interestingly, the judge granted immunity to the police officer, and because it's not an appellate decision by the federal judge, I don't know what the arguments were, and I don't know what the reasoning is. It seems a little confusing to me. So the police officer escaped the civil liability, but the city did not. And one of the allegations was that the city did not provide adequate training and did not require its officers to obey the speed limit. So, not great facts, horrible injuries, and the city got hit for $13 million. It's going up on appeal. Again, the city is claiming that they should have been granted immunity on appeal. And the city questioned the damages because of the relationship that Mr. Payne had with his wife and children, and said that the damages were too high because he was not that close to them. I don't know if that's a winning argument or not, but I'm glad I'm not making it. This case has already been up to the Fifth Circuit. It was taken up before the case actually went to trial. Fifth Circuit agreed and said that the immunity for the officer was correct, but the city did not get the immunity. And finally, the state versus Adrian Gonzalez. Has anybody been following this one? Okay, so this one, I'm trying not to take a stand on anything today, so hopefully I've done pretty good at that. This one is difficult. There were 400 officers that responded to the call at Robb Elementary. Those 400 officers did not breach the door where the shooter was for 77 minutes. Mr. Gonzalez was part of the police force for the school district. And if you remember the case well, there was a car wreck. The shooter wrecked the car outside of the school. When Mr. Gonzalez received the call, he was responding to a car wreck. When he got there, he found out that there was an active shooter involved. He moved forward. He got some children out of the school. He tried to relay back any information he had, and he was soon any supervisory capacity he had was soon washed away by other officers showing up. He and his boss, the head of the police force for the school district, were the only two officers charged and indicted. Mr. Gonzalez was indicted on 29 accounts of child endangerment, and I'm trying to find the exact. It was child endangerment, and it went to a jury. The prosecution put on 36 witnesses. The defense put on 2. Their argument was they had just kind of pulled him out of nowhere to make a scapegoat out of him. That was pretty much the whole defense in the case. The reason it's not covered by governmental immunity is it's a criminal case, and the jury had it for 7 hours. They went back over. They asked to see some of the testimony again, and they ended up acquitting him on all counts. This does not help the families. Maybe finding him guilty wouldn't have helped the families either. These cases, and I'm sure we have some police officers here today, these are difficult decisions made in difficult times, and oftentimes without enough information. And then these go to a jury who, they're back there in a room, and they're drinking their coffee, and they're eating whatever treats have been set out for them, and they are looking back in hindsight and judging these cases. There's been talk that qualified immunity may go away. It hasn't yet, but there's always the stick in this is that if you're charged with a crime, it goes away anyway, and that's what ultra vires acts are. So, didn't want to start the seminar on a gloomy note, but anyway, hopefully they get it worked out. and things aren't as bad as I have a tendency to see them. But anyway, I appreciate your time this morning and enjoy the seminar. Thank you.